So, how do you take your love of trains from a hobby to a very successful business that works with some of the biggest companies in the world?
Sean Bautista tells us exactly how that happened for him.
This is Railroad Showcase.
When we started building stuff basically according to Eric's standard in 5-inch scale, 15-inch gauge, people started seeing what you do, and they'd ride the train, and next, this guy would come up and say, "Where'd you buy this?" And you go, "Well, you can't. You have to build it." And so you find out that this guy has a 3-foot gauge, and he's interested in somebody building him train cars, and the next thing you know, you're building 3-foot gauge. So you got a whole nother product line started. So the good news is, there's the technology that we developed in the 5-inch scale transcends into the 3-foot gauge, what we call 8-inch scale, with additional engineering to make sure it all works. But it's there, and because we document everything, and create our own drawings and assembly drawings and part drawings and all that, it allows us to. We have a good foundation. So it's been a fun progression and an interesting one. Back when all this started, if you'd have told me I was going to be doing all that, I would have said you were crazy. This engine here is in because of the fire damages in Northern California, and the engine house it was stored in got heat damage, so we brought it here. And while it was here, I wanted to make some improvements to it, so we made some changes while it was here. We took the entire floor out, all the firing quadrant, Johnson bar quadrant, and the old cast Porter base plate. There's a whole giant casting in there that has the knuckle in it that catches the drawbar, and it was worn out to half a pin diameter. So every time this engine moved, it would go donk. Take that out and then back again. And so we machined that out, machined new pins, put bearings in it, bushings in it, bolted it all back together. We get a lot of questions about that firebox door. Now the Porter, this Porter has been fueled by 3 different types of fuel in its life. Solid, and 2 of those were solid fuel, and now it's an oil-fired locomotive. So it was first a coal-fired locomotive, and then it was a wood-fired locomotive. Now it's an oil-fired locomotive. So technically, that's the wrong door to have on an oil-fire engine. However, way back somewhere, this thing cracked, and they repaired it. And you can see the rivets and the patches they put on it, and all the pitting on the outside. It's just such a cool-looking door. We just couldn't bear to take it off of there. The cracks actually provide the vent and sort of the peephole that you use on an oil-fired door. And so we're able to use that. And the engine would fire more efficiently if we changed it out with an proper oil-fired door on it. But for right now, the owner loves it like that. And that door goes way back to before. This engine was owned by Ollie Johnson, famous Disney animator back in the day. And before that, it was owned by a small amusement park. And before that, it was owned by a quarry company. And we don't know when in the past, but my guess by the rivets and everything else, this thing was probably repaired in the early 1900s. The locomotive is a 1901 Porter, so it's 118 years old right now, and she still runs great. So we've made a lot of modifications to this engine, including all the controls you see here. The only original parts left in this loco, obviously the door we talked about, the water glass here with the tube is original, and the drain cock lever, and everything else you see in here we've created for it. And this locomotive, what's interesting about the locomotive and its whole train is that there are no electric accommodations in here at all. So the headlight, the marker lights, the interior cab lights, the gauge lights are all oil fired. And so this engine runs with a match, not with electricity at all. And so what you see here, these things, and they're kind of a little bit tarnished now, these are the holders for the actual light fixtures. There's one there, one there, and one down here. And part of the fireman's job is to light those. There's tiny little miniature lanterns that go inside there and actually illuminate the gauges. The biggest customers we have are one of 2 types. They're either like an amusement park that has a budget, and it's run by project management. It usually is controlled by engineering, and the ultimate customer is whoever runs the train on that particular amusement park. And they have some big engines and big cars and big needs, track, locomotive rebuilds and things like that. And they tend to be good if you have estimated your costs properly, or they can bankrupt you if you've estimated your costs wrongly, because the projects involve, generally to rebuild a 3-foot gauge locomotive, we figure up 20,000 man hours. And if you mess up on that estimate, you can end up having to, put your house in hock to pay them to build their engine instead of making money building the engine. So a lot of people wanting to get into this because they have a passion for steam and they think they can make money because of, there's a need out there. There's also a great ability to shoot yourself in the head while you're doing this. And that's the hardest part of the job, because how do you estimate what it's going to cost to overhaul a steam engine? You don't know. When's the last time somebody cast one of those wheels or made that kind of boiler? Prices may have gone up 100% in 2 years. So it's very hard to kind of get that estimate out. Without too much in the way of numbers, I don't know, the typical, if you take 20,000 man hours and just break it down, you can figure out how much things cost, right? But typically, 20,000, a typical person working a year is 2,000 man hours. So it takes us 10 man years to overhaul a 3-foot gauge locomotive. And by overhaul, I mean everything is new and everything is to mil spec. So the wheels are x-rayed, the cylinders are x-rayed. We don't allow occlusions or voids inside there. Everything is traceable to its origin. All the metallurgy, even the wood, traceable to its origin. Everything is done to code, including the electrical code, building codes, and stuff that are involved on the loco. That takes about 20,000 man hours, and 20,000 man hours at, let's say you're charging $100 an hour for your shop, that's $2 million, right? So you can see that overhauling a 3-foot gauge engine is not too far away from building a 3-foot gauge engine if you were to do that. And you can see why that cost is high. Another thing is you can one thing we've seen is the boiler on a steam locomotive. You want to get an idea of what locomotives cost. The boiler on a steam locomotive is roughly 10% of the cost of the engine, whether that's an overhaul or the purchase price or whatever. So if you go to a guy and he says, I'll build you a new boiler for $20,000, it's probably the engine net worth of the engine's about $200,000 in general by the time you overhaul the whole thing. And we've seen that time and time again. It's a rough number, but it's a good ballpark number. If some of the big engines we've overhauled, the boilers are $200,000, and it's a 20,000 man-hour project, and the whole project costs $2 million. So it's right there in the ballpark. But those are numbers that anybody who's getting interested in this stuff can look at and go, oh, can I afford this or not? Or what am I really getting myself into? You can save some of that money if you do work yourself, but work means time. And like I tell some of my customers, you want 2 years out of my life, how much is 2 years of your life worth, and what are you willing to pay for it?
So, we sure hope you enjoyed hearing about the Hillcrest and Wautoki Railroad and listening to Sean talk about his business experiences in the railroad world, and we have much more where that came from.
Keep your eyes open. For our members, we have some special content, and we're going to have more information on that coming soon.
Thanks for watching. Keep your hand on the throttle and your eye on the rail.